Mark groaned, burying his head under his arms in the hospital room. Sarah watched him with a knowing smirk, cradling their newborn daughter in her arms. "Relax, Mark. Everything's okay," she said, her voice laced with amusement. "Sarah, this is bad." "This is really bad," Mark exclaimed, panicked. "My mom saw us, heard everything. What do we do now? How do I even begin to explain?" "Mark, come on," Sarah retorted. "Aren't you tired of this whole charade? We have a baby now, our daughter. The obvious answer is a clean break, a quick divorce, and we both move on with our lives. Don't you think?" "What are you talking about?" Mark sputtered, disbelief coloring his voice. "It's too late for that. How did we even get here?" "So you're not happy about our daughter?" Sarah challenged. "Remember when we were dating? You didn't mind that I lived with my mom. We were good then. And now that it's all out in the open, my mom can't interfere anymore. You need to make a choice, Mark," Sarah continued, her tone firm. "Me, young and by your side, or your mom, a bit past her prime. Get it? So, who will it be?" "Time's ticking, Mark. Decide." 2 years prior, Susan Anderson was on cloud 9. At 45, she'd finally met someone special. Their paths crossed while waiting in line at a cozy coffee shop in downtown Seattle. Mark Miller, a ruggedly handsome man, seemed nervous about his upcoming appointment. For some reason, Susan felt compelled to lighten the mood. Their conversation flowed easily, and they exchanged numbers. Within days, Mark asked Susan out on a date. After a few months of getting to know each other, Mark proposed. Susan didn't shy away from mentioning her daughter, Sarah. She was upfront about their living situation. "Mark," Susan began, "Sarah's an adult, 21, but we still live together. Maybe I haven't pushed her to be fully independent yet. Since her father passed away 8 years ago, things haven't been easy. She doesn't have a steady job and spends a lot of time with friends, usually at cafes or weekend getaways." "Susan, honesty is key," Mark reassured her. "Before I started my business, I used to be a police officer. Trust me, I can handle a little drama. We'll be fine." Susan, already smitten, couldn't back out now. Introducing Sarah to her future husband was inevitable. To ease the tension, Susan decided to prepare Sarah for the meeting. One Saturday morning, Susan Anderson roused her daughter, Sarah, from sleep. Sarah stumbled into the kitchen, bleary-eyed and grumpy. "What's up, Mom? Why so early?" she mumbled. "It's almost noon, honey. Time to wake up. We need to talk." Susan began cautiously. "Ugh, not this again," Sarah interrupted, rolling her eyes. "Look, I don't care what the neighbors think. I'm an adult, and I'll live my life how I want. If I want to go to the club with friends or sleep in late, that's my business. You can't control me." "Hold on, Sarah," Susan soothed. "Can't you be a little less hostile? Your attitude is getting out of hand." "Just get to the point, Mom. I need a shower," Sarah sighed. "Here's the thing, Sarah," Susan announced, taking a deep breath. "I'm getting married." "What?" Sarah's eyes widened. "Married? Who to? At your age, shouldn't you be focusing on, like, self-care and meditation?" "Sarah," Susan exclaimed, exasperated. "That's disrespectful. How can you talk to me like that?" "Hey, I'm just being honest. Why get married? Did you find some sugar daddy? And please, no babies after the wedding. Maybe then I'd finally get some peace and quiet around here. This is crazy. Are we done? Bathroom break, please. Seriously, if you're really doing this, move out soon. Maybe then I can have some privacy." Sarah disappeared into the bathroom, leaving Susan alone at the kitchen table. Susan sighed, defeated. Why couldn't Sarah be happy for her? Why the constant negativity? Didn't she deserve some happiness too? Shrugging it off, Sarah chuckled to herself in the bathroom. Getting married at her age? Who'd even want her? I gotta find out who this guy is." Back in her room, Sarah was followed by Susan. "Sarah, listen, I haven't finished. I invited Mark to visit on Tuesday. I want you to meet him. It would be a huge favor if you could clear your schedule that night and stay home. Your friends can wait, okay?" "Ugh, this is the worst," Sarah grumbled. "Fine, I'll stay for a bit. But don't expect me to listen to all the mushy details of your love life." Meanwhile, Mark prepared meticulously for his meeting with Sarah. He bought 2 bouquets of flowers, a box of fancy chocolates, and even a new suit. He felt surprisingly nervous, like a teenager on a first date. Having never been married before, meeting his future stepdaughter was uncharted territory. Susan, on the other hand, couldn't contain her excitement. She fussed over the dinner table and kept glancing at the clock, urging Sarah to get ready. "Sarah, please change. What are you wearing? That skirt is way too short, and that top is too revealing. What will Mark think? And for goodness sake, me too. Put on something more decent," Susan pleaded. "Mom, relax. I told you, I'm only staying a short while. My friends are waiting," Sarah dismissed her dismissively. That night, Sarah had one goal: impress Maxim, a wealthy guy she'd been chasing for months. Her plan: charm him, get pregnant, and secure a marriage. So far, Maxim wasn't interested, maybe sensing her motives. When the doorbell rang, Susan was in her room, frustrated that Sarah wouldn't change out of her revealing outfit. "Sarah, can you get the door, honey? I'll be down in a sec," Susan called out. Sarah grumbled and headed to the door. She flung it open, surprised to see a tall, handsome man standing there. Maxim instantly vanished from her mind. "Hi, are you Mark?" she asked, her voice brighter than usual. "Please come in. We've been waiting for you." "Wow, those flowers are beautiful. Thanks, that's so sweet of you." Sarah skipped the club that night. Instead, she joined her mom and Mark for dinner, laughing and playfully flirting with him. Susan barely noticed, but Mark picked up on it and kept his distance. Sarah was instantly smitten with Mark Miller. She barely noticed anyone else the rest of the evening. Naturally, Susan was oblivious. After seeing Mark off, she turned to Sarah. "So, what did you think of him?" Susan asked hopefully. "He seems okay," Sarah replied nonchalantly. "Nice guy, good manners, looks good. But honestly, Mom, with all due respect, marriage seems a bit much at your age. Maybe just casual dating. Why the rush?" "No way," Susan said firmly. "Mark proposed, and I said yes. I'm glad you approve, though." "Nah, I'm not going out tonight," Sarah said dismissively. "Just not feeling it. Bedtime for me." Alone in her room, Sarah strategized. Something felt off about Mark being with her mom. But what? Determined to have Mark for herself, she convinced herself she deserved happiness. Mark seemed successful, his suit looked expensive, and wealth was a plus. After all, wasn't love a battlefield? With her mom now seen as competition, Sarah surprisingly became very involved in the wedding planning. She tagged along on shopping trips, offering opinions on dresses, and even insisted on joining Mark when he looked at wedding venues. Her first move came 2 weeks later. They were alone in the car. Susan was at the salon, and Mark offered to drive Sarah home. Sarah saw her chance. Aware of the situation, Mark remained professional, politely shutting down her advances. Sarah went all out. Mesh tights, suggestive size, a skirt that barely covered anything. Mark was flustered by the young woman's boldness, but held firm, refusing to be drawn in. He didn't want to confront Susan directly about Sarah's inappropriate behavior. Instead, he decided to move to his country house after the wedding. This way, Sarah could live alone in their apartment. At the wedding, Sarah caused a scene. First, her outfit choice was inappropriate, a short, black gothic dress that clashed with the wedding's formality. Second, Sarah had too much to drink and acted inappropriately towards Mark. She even went as far as kissing him on the lips in front of everyone, including her mother. Susan, mortified by her daughter's behavior, pulled her aside to express her disapproval. Sarah simply laughed it off. "Relax, Mom. It's just a little kiss. Can't I congratulate my new stepdad? Besides, it was supposed to be on the cheek." "Whoops. Big deal. Why are you being such a drag?" After this incident, Sarah stormed out of the reception, leaving her mother speechless. Already drunk, she went to a club and ended up spending the night with a stranger. Casual hookups were typical for Sarah, and she didn't see anything wrong with it. Mark, concealing his true motives, suggested Xenia move in with him after the wedding. "Honey, you're right. It's time Sarah learned some independence. Let her try living on her own. Maybe we should stop giving her money so readily. She's an adult now and needs to take responsibility for herself. If she needs money, she can get a job." Susan, seeing the logic in his words, packed her things and moved in with Mark, leaving Sarah on her own. Sarah left some money for her daughter and offered some tough love. "Look, here's some cash to get you started. Time to get serious, honey. Find a job, learn to live on your own. You need to think about your future. I straightened out my life, now it's your turn. Behave yourself, okay? You know Mrs. Johnson next door. We don't want any police trouble. If she hears loud music or yelling past 10, she calls the cops immediately." Despite her protests, Sarah didn't want Susan to move in with Mark. She even tried to convince her mom to have Mark move in with them instead. But Susan explained that 3 people in a 2-bedroom apartment would be cramped. Plus, she and Mark wanted some privacy. They couldn't take a honeymoon due to work, so at least they could enjoy some peace and quiet at the country house. The money Sarah left dwindled quickly. Even though she had no intention of working, she'd call Susan 2 or 3 times a week, asking for money for groceries. Susan, unable to say no to her own daughter, kept transferring money to Sarah's card. Meanwhile, Sarah, caught up in her daily life, didn't realize she hadn't had her period in a while. It wasn't until she missed it that she discovered she was pregnant. Susan was floored by the news of becoming a grandma. "Seriously?" she exclaimed. "Honey, how are you going to manage? No job, no education. Don't you think you should have used protection?" "Don't yell," Sarah snapped back at her mom. "It's too late for lectures. You're not getting rid of this baby. In fact, I'm moving in with you. Pregnant and alone. The apartment's out of the question. Do you want me to starve here? I doubt Mark would care. I need help right now." Susan persuaded Mark to let Sarah move in, even though he wasn't thrilled. He seemed to have a feeling that her presence would bring trouble. The 6 months leading up to the birth were relatively peaceful. Sarah wasn't feeling well, and her attempts to flirt with Mark had fizzled out. She figured once the baby came, she'd have to triple her efforts. No man would be interested in a heavily pregnant woman, after all. Susan doted on her grandson Michael from the moment she held him. Her love for him was unconditional and endless. Sarah, however, showed little interest in her son and happily left his care to her mother. Susan practically raised Michael from infancy. Sarah wouldn't breastfeed him, so Susan temporarily moved into the nursery. She was up all night feeding, changing, and swaddling Michael. She even had to quit her job to care for him, but luckily, she had some savings. This left little time for Susan's husband, Mark, which Sarah managed to exploit. When Susan left for a 3-day visit to her sister with 3-month-old Michael, Sarah made a move on Mark. Mark started leading a double life. Susan's focus was entirely on her grandson, and she didn't notice the inappropriate closeness developing between Sarah and Mark. Mark started seeing Sarah romantically. They spent weekends together, and Mark readily agreed to buy her a gym membership and often paid for her things. Deep down, Susan was happy. It seemed like a real family now, and Mark finally seemed to be treating Sarah well. When Michael was 5 months old, Susan was stunned by the news that Sarah was pregnant again. How? When? Sarah, are you serious? Susan exclaimed. Mom, this baby was planned. I got pregnant on purpose from the man I love. Yes, he's married, but that's how it is. Don't judge me. I'm past your lectures. I'm fighting for my happiness, and I'll eventually win over his family. This is his first child, and I believe he'll make the right choice when he finds out, Sarah explained passionately. Later, Susan recounted the conversation with Sarah to Mark, who was pale with shock. What? Sarah is pregnant? That's impossible. Yes, she is. And soon, we'll have another grandchild, Susan confirmed. When Sarah reached 6 months pregnant, Susan decided to go with her to the doctor's appointment at their cottage. They called a taxi, but on the way, they were in a minor car accident. The driver lost control, but luckily they were going slow and no one was seriously hurt. Susan called her husband Mark right away. Mark, you won't believe it. We were in a car accident. I hit my head pretty hard. Wait, Mark interrupted. What about Sarah? Is she okay? That's the most important thing. Is she hurt? She's fine. She was in the back, buckled up. Not a scratch on her. Oh, thank goodness. I'm so glad she's all right. What about me, Mark? Don't you care about how I'm feeling? You didn't even let me finish, Susan said, hurt. Mark stammered. Well, of course I care about Sarah being pregnant, even though it's not mine. But you're okay. That's the main thing. Susan was stung by his words, but held it in. Can you come pick us up? Absolutely. I'm on my way. It seemed like a strange coincidence that the accident happened right before Susan learned a shocking truth. As she headed upstairs to Sarah's room, she overheard a conversation between Sarah and Mark that made it clear Sarah's baby was actually Mark's. Everything after that became a blur. Suddenly, Susan snapped back to reality when she felt a jolt on the street. Someone grabbed her shoulders and shook her. Disoriented, she looked up at a man who was yelling something she couldn't understand. Her head was spinning and her ears were ringing. Hey, watch it. You could have gotten hurt. If I hadn't grabbed you, that car would have hit you. Are you okay? The man shook her a few times more. A concerned stranger asked, Ma'am, do you need medical attention? Should we call an ambulance? I'm not feeling well. But I'm okay, thank you. I need to go. My grandchild needs me. Susan took a deep breath, trying to clear her head from the shock. She pulled out her phone and called a taxi to take her home. She needed time to process everything for the sake of her grandson, Misha. Back at home, her mind raced. Everything would have to change. She had to figure out a way to protect Misha. Sarah seemed uninterested in her older son, but now she had a child with the man she claimed to love. Susan replayed the events of the past years in her mind, the truth settling in like a heavy weight. It all clicked into place. Mark's constant concern for Sarah, his eagerness to set up another nursery, he was preparing for his own child, Sarah's baby. The moment Susan returned home, she fired the nanny and started packing her and Misha's things. She wouldn't stay another minute under Mark's roof. The truth was undeniable. Mark arrived about half an hour later. Susan couldn't even look at him, but he launched into a difficult conversation anyway. Susan, please listen. I never meant for things to go this way. I don't know how it happened. I'm truly sorry for what I've done. You lied to me, Susan said, her voice cold. I can't even be in the same room with you right now. How could you do this? I'm filing for divorce. Neither you nor Sarah seem to care about Misha, so I'm taking him with me. I'll fight for full custody and try to forget this nightmare. Wait, let's talk about this. Don't touch me, Susan snapped for the first time. Keep your distance. You betrayed me. And this is how you treat me. If anything, it's partly your fault. You shut me out after Misha was born. You stopped being interested in me. If that makes you feel better, I tried to resist at first. I stayed away from Sarah, but you were so distant. And for the record, she was the one coming on to me. Maybe if you'd raised her better, none of this would have happened. But she seemed to understand me in a way you didn't. She cared about me, and I confess, I was attracted to her. What man could resist that? At least you got your precious daughter. You knew I couldn't have more kids at my age. Susan didn't respond. Tears streamed down her face as she carried Misha out the door, dragging a heavy suitcase behind her. Mark watched her leave, bewildered. The taxi arrived a moment later, whisking Susan and Misha away. It would be a long road to recovery for Susan after the betrayal of her husband and daughter. She kept her word and filed for divorce, cutting off all contact with Mark and Sarah. News eventually reached Susan that Mark had moved Sarah and her baby into their cottage after they left the hospital. But Misha remained with Susan. It seemed no one else wanted him. All of Misha's belongings and the necessary paperwork were delivered to Susan by courier. She even got notarized documents granting her the right to take Misha to doctor's appointments. Men were the last thing on Susan's mind. Her grandson was her entire world now. Her only worry was whether Sarah would ever want to come back for Misha. I hope you enjoyed this story. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more awesome stories in the future. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey, and we'll see you next video.